Homo Finance YouTube channel. Tonight we're going to be talking about dividend yields. What are they? How are they calculated? Why are they important? So we're going to be going through all that tonight. Now make sure you read the notes, my disclaimer in the notes. I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. And if you're new here, head over to my YouTube channel where I do a whole host of finance videos which I think you'll really enjoy if you're interested in topics like this. So we're going to be talking about tonight dividend yields. Now what prompted this topic was something I received on my social media from Moo Australia, where they talk about the highest paying dividend yielding companies in Australia for the 2024 calendar year. Now again, I'm not making any recommendations to buy any of these companies. We're just going to use that for the sake of an example. So if you remove some of the outliers, you'll see that the highest dividend yielding companies in Australia pay from around 4.5% to 5%. Okay, now that's really important to know. And the reason that's important to know is because your return as an investor is made up of two components. The capital return, being the increase and decrease in the stock price, that's part of your return. And then the dividend return as well, which is also known as the dividend yield. So that's really important to know because the dividend yield makes up half your total return as an investor. So if we use some of those examples, 4.5%, 5% that we saw on the page before, if we were to buy a stock for $100 and it was a 5% dividend yielding company, then each and every year you get about a $5 dividend. That's what that means in terms of dividend yield, okay? So now, the next question is, how do we actually calculate the dividend yield? So you'll see on the previous slide that, in the right corner, it says dividend yield TTM, okay? That stands for trailing 12 months. So these investment companies like Moo, Yahoo Finance, all those sorts of companies, the way they calculate dividend yield, and we're going to do an example on NAB, National Australia Bank. If you can see at the bottom, we're going to do a worked example of that. So what these companies do is take the dividends paid in the prior 12 months. So for NAB, they paid a dividend in December, 85 cents per share. They also paid a dividend in July, 84 cents per share. And then they add those two together. So for the year, they paid $1.69 of a dividend, okay? And then what they do is divide that amount by whatever the share price is at the time. So for in this example, we divide $1.69 by the share price on the 31st of December, which was $37.10. That gave us a dividend yield of 4.56%. Now that's pretty close to the dividend yield in the chart here, which is 4.4%. A little bit different because it just depends on what share price they use. They might have used a share price in the middle of the day or the start of the day or an average. You know, I've just grabbed the share price for the sake of an example, okay? So that's important to know how dividend yield is calculated. Normally the prior period's dividends, here we're taking the prior calendar year to December 24, divided by the share price at the time. So it's also important to know that dividend yield is constantly moving as the share price is moving. Now, a company, one thing that's important to remember, that a company don't always pay dividends, okay? So dividends is a payment of profits. So what's important to try and factor in if you're trying to predict if a company will pay dividends into the future is go and look up their dividend history. Do they pay dividends regularly? Do they pay a similar amount each time? Have they missed any dividends? Because that'll be a really important, just because it has a high dividend yield, it may not always pay dividends going into the future. So that's a really important thing to consider as well. Go look at the dividend history. Check what kind of dividends they paid. Are they paying them regularly? Are they ever missing dividends? Is there a similar amount? Do they have a dividend policy as a company? They may pay out a certain percentage of profit as dividends, and that'll help you be able to better predict the dividend yield moving into the future. Now, what's also important to know that just because a company has a low dividend yield is not necessarily a bad thing. So if dividends stay the same, paying dividends as they go along, and the share price rockets up, then dividend yield will decrease. Okay, dividend yield will decrease because dividends have stayed the same. There's been a quick shoot up in share price, which means the dividend yield has gone down. And if we go back to our formula of what our total return is, so just because we might have a low dividend yield, is not necessarily bad in itself, because we may have had a really high, in the example I've given, share price might have really taken off, and then we may have a high capital return instead. Okay, so it's good to, you need to consider both of these in isolation and then combine them, but you also need to take a bigger look at the bigger picture. You know, the most important thing is total return. That's what we're really concerned with. So having a low dividend yield in its own right is not necessarily a bad thing. And then kind of counter to that, the next step to that is that some companies pay out all of their profits for the year in dividends, or a very, very large percentage of it. So the flip side of that is having a really, really high dividend yield might not be a great thing as well. Okay, so companies, some sort of real estate investment trusts, some investment companies pay out a very, very large portion of their profit each and every year. And when they do that, it means that if they're paying out a whole bunch of profit, the only way for them to grow as a company is to sometimes get debt or other means like that. So if a company has a really, really high dividend yield, you know, we're talking about 7, 8%, even 9% sometimes their share price might be quite stagnant because they're paying out their profits each and every year. Okay, so the share price might not be going anywhere. So in our equation, the capital growth is really limited, but the dividend yield is quite high. It has to be high. It looks high because they're paying out their dividends each and every, their profits each year. So having a really high dividend yield in itself is not necessarily a great thing either. You need to really understand how the company works, understand what profits is being paid out, how much dividends are being paid out, okay? And then if it is paying out all its profits, you need to be satisfied in yourself that that return, if it's a 7 or 8% dividend yield, might be the only return that you get. Is that enough to cross your hurdles in terms of making an investment decision? That's something to really consider as well. So kind of wrapping that all up together, dividend yield, very important. In our equation of total return, we have capital return, and we have dividend yield. Put that together, and that's our total return as an investor. Okay. But then as we break those components down and we look at dividend yield itself, having a low dividend yield is not necessarily always a bad thing. Having a high dividend yield is not always a great thing, okay? You need to really understand the company. Has it had massive capital growth such that its dividend yield has decreased? Does it pay out all its profits and dividends in each year such that its capital growth will be quite stagnant? These are all things you need to consider when you're looking at an investment and calculating your total return. Really hope you found that useful. If you did, please like the video. It will help push it out to other viewers. If you want to see more from me, head over to my channel and check out some of my other videos, or please consider subscribing and coming on this journey with me. And I'll see you guys next time.